Hi guys, welcome to our next lesson on the poetry of Seamus Heaney. Today, and for most of this week actually, we're going to be looking at a poem called The Early Purges. This is the final poem that we're going to look at by Heaney, and it is definitely one of the more difficult poems in terms of its subject matter to kind of deal with. It's deals with very difficult part of life. Some descriptions are quite harsh and cruel. So just to prepare you for that this is not a jovial poem. This is a poem about a very dark subject matter, and it can be quite a difficult topic. So just before we go into reading the poem itself, the title of the poem, The Early Purges. Now, if we're just like we practice with most of the poetry we do, if we were to look at this as an unseen poem, we need to look at the title first to kind of see if there's any clues within there about what the poem could be describing or what topic could be coming up in the poem. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask you to pause here for about 30 to 40 seconds and think about those words, the early purges. What does it mean to purge, okay? You know, if you're purging something, those of you who study history with me, we'll have talked about the purges in Soviet Russia. But that verb, what does it mean? And does it fit with the word early? Okay, so let's just pause here, take a few seconds, 30 seconds, a minute, and just think about that. Can you come up with any hypothesis of what, or any ideas of what this poem may be about based on the title? Okay, so the key words here are obviously early and purges. Purge means to get rid of something that's unwanted. Okay, to get rid of something that you don't care about, that you don't want around you. So it's definitely something that's been pushed away. But the word early here doesn't seem to fit with that. If you're getting rid of something too early, why are you getting rid of something early? It seems to be they just don't seem to fit well together. So there's a sense maybe of something wrong before we even read the poem. Something has been purged and possibly regret in terms of it being too early. So basically today we're just going to read and make some annotations around the poem. We will discuss the poem in more detail tomorrow in the live lesson. So, first impressions, what is the poem about? What ideas does Heaney want us to think about here? And how do you think Heaney wants us to react when reading this poem? I'm just going to read it to you first, and then we'll come back and look at those questions in a minute. So the poem goes, I was 6 when I first saw kittens drown. Dan Taggart pitched them, the scraggy wee shits, into a bucket, a frail metal sound. Soft paws scraping like mad, but their tiny din was soon soused. They were slung on the snout of the pump, and the water pumped in. Sure, isn't it better for them now? Dan said. Like wet gloves they bobbed and shone till he sluiced them out on the dunghill, glossy and dead. Suddenly frightened, for days I sadly hung round the yard, watching the 3 sogged remains turn mealy and crisp as old summer dung, until I forgot them. But the fear came back when Dan trapped big rats, snared rabbits, shot crows, or, with a sickening tug, pulled old hens' necks. Still, living displaces false sentiments, and now, when shrill pups are prodded to drown, I just shrug. Bloody pups. It makes sense. Prevention of cruelty talk cuts ice in town, where they consider death unnatural, but on well-run farms pests have to be kept down. Okay, so you'll see that what I talked about earlier, that this is not a easy poem. The topic of the poem, the plot of the poem is very, very cruel and very in your face, and something that there's no forgiveness offered here, or there's no he's not trying to hide anything from us as readers here. It's very much a stark image of what life on the farm was for Heaney growing up. So before we go into looking at it in a good bit of detail, we just need to have the basics here, okay? So 3 questions there. What is it about? I just want to know the plot. What is the plot of the poem? Okay, you might need to read through it 2 or 3 times to really get it. Okay, what ideas does Heaney want us to think about here? Okay, what is the themes here? Okay, Is this about family? Is this about friendship? Is this about pain? What is this about? And how do you think Heaney wants us to react when reading this poem? Okay? Now think about it. Don't look just at what he says, look at how he says it. What does he want the reader to think? What do you think he wants the reader to think? And try and look past your own prejudices, your own ideas that you've brought here. Okay? Think about what's in the poem, what's being said, and the tone that you think it's being said in. What does he want us to react in what way does he want us to react here? So that should take you 4 or 5 minutes to really give a good answer to those questions, okay? So I'm going to ask you to pause here, take your time, read through this poem 2 or 3 more times, answer those questions. Okay, so essentially, if we just look really quickly at those questions, what's the poem about? The poem is about Heaney as a boy growing up on a farm, watching and seeing as a 6-year-old kittens being drowned because they're seen simply as a pest, something that is unwanted on the farm. And as Heaney then points out that as he grew up on the farm, this killing of unwanted animals was a normal part of life on the farm. Okay, so you see there in stanza 5 with the rats, the rabbits, the crows, the hens' necks, animals are being killed it's a regular occurrence on a farm. And he seems by the end to have become hardened to it. Now, there is some discussion to be had around the tone of the last 2 stanzas. Do you think he really means this? Perhaps think about the title in there as well. But definitely there is a matter of factness in this poem of what life on a farm is like and the fact that animals are killed. Okay? There's also, it seems to be, we could look at the end about the difference between the urban and rural life, as a different theme that we might discuss. Okay. In terms of reactions, obviously this poem is intended to shock to a certain extent. That first line really, it just grabs us very, very quickly. There's some really very disturbing images in there, just soft paws scraping like mad. The description of the remains of the kittens turn there at the end of the 4th stanza, turn mealy and crisp as old summer dung. He is definitely drawing very vivid imagery here that is there to shock and to really challenge our sense of the world and challenge our sense of life on a farm. And perhaps he's pointing out that we should be very aware of this, that we all are reliant on farms to keep us fed and produce the food for the world. Perhaps we need to be more aware of this cruel reality of life. Okay, so there's quite a lot there to really think about in this poem. Okay, now as I said, we will discuss this in more detail tomorrow. Just want to get your basic ideas out today. If we look then in a bit more detail, so again, I want you to have all of this basic knowledge ready for tomorrow so we can have a proper detailed discussion when we get to our live lesson tomorrow. These questions I am going to ask you to submit, so I'll read through the stanzas now in a second, but the questions are, which images or lines stand out to you here? So I'm looking at what images, and why they stand out to you. That's your effect and your technique we're talking about there. What other techniques other than imagery, what I mean there, what other techniques might you find? Why do you think those techniques have been used? Okay, so if we read through the first 3 stanzas again. I was 6 when I saw kittens drown. Dan Taggart pitched him, the scraggy wee shits, into a bucket, a frail metal sound. Soft paws scraping like mad, but their tiny din was soon soused. They were slung on the snout of the pump and the water pumped in. Sure, isn't it better for them now? Dan said. Like wet gloves they bobbed and shunned till he sluiced them out on the dunghill, glossy and dead. So, again, I'm going to suggest, pausing here for 3 or 4 minutes, finding what images are in there, okay? There's more than one image in there, okay? There's a few in there. What other techniques are being used? We're looking at simile, we're looking at alliteration, we're looking at onomatopoeia, we're looking at personification, all those different techniques that you're aware of, what's in there and why have they been used. We need to be looking at that why, okay, really, really important. So some of the things you may have pointed out here, now there's a lot more. I'm just going to point out some of the big ones. You may point out there's a bit of a sibilance in the start second stanza. Soft pause, scraping, soon soused, slung snout. There's a definite repetition of the S sound, and this is not a pleasant sound to hear or a pleasant image to be experiencing. So there's definitely a play on that with the repetition of the S sound. We have some direct quotations from the people and some colloquial language, I suppose, harsh language, there's a curse word, or I don't know if you can't, but very bad and poor language being used, but very colloquial, the scraggy wee shits. It is at this stage portraying Dan Taggart as a villain. Now that may change later on, but it's very much setting up here. In the first stanza, Dan Taggart is the bad guy with language he uses and with the actions, obviously, that he's doing. We do start to see a little bit more of Dan, however, when he says, "Sure, isn't it better for them now?" Now we may immediately, I think most of us would think no, but at least it shows that Dan is trying to justify his actions to himself. Other things you might point out, you might see there glossy and dead. Okay, that idea of glossy, the wet body is very, very vivid imagery. The frail metal sound, I think something in that hollow din and that's really quite eerie coming on here. Okay, so just some of those techniques you might have pointed out. Okay, some of the imagery. Again, I'm going to ask you to just give me a quick one to two sentences for each of those questions to submit, and we'll talk about them in a bit more detail tomorrow. If we move on then to the later stanzas. Suddenly frightened, for days I sadly hung round the yard, watching the three sogged remains turn mealy and crisp as old summer dung, until I forgot them. But the fear came back when Dan trapped big rats, snared rabbits, shot crows, or with a sickening tug pulled old hens' necks. Still, living displaces false sentiments, and now, when shrill pups are prodded to drown, I just shrug. Bloody pups. It makes sense. Prevention of cruelty talk cuts ice in the town, where they consider death unnatural, but on well-run farms pests have to be kept down. So again, there's some imagery coming across here. So what are those images that are standing out to you? So same three questions, okay? 2 sentences for each of them. What are the images that are coming around to you? Look at this. You might need to read this here again. Sometimes when we read this poem first time, the initial image is the one that kind of captures us really, and we miss some of what goes on later. So look at what he's describing here. You might need to read these stanzas a few times. What is the image that stands out? Okay, what do you see when you read these lines? Okay, what is he telling us about life on the farm? Other techniques, is there anything in there you might see? Okay, I'm going to give you a few seconds, or ask you to pause in a second to really look at it yourself. And why do you think those techniques have been used? Okay, so pause here, read through again, have a think about some of those questions, and grab me 2 sentences each, please. Okay, so I suppose what you might see here is the image of death is coming very, very strongly across here. We see listing there in the second stanza that's displayed. I think it's the 5th stanza overall. Big rats, snared rabbits, shot crows, still the sickening tug of pulled old hens' necks. He's pointing out the vastness of death on a farm, how often it is, how regular it is. This is part of everyday life. Animals being killed all the time. I think one of the images that stands out for me will be in the first stanza that's displayed here. The 3 sogged remains turn mealy and crisp as old summer dung. That rotting of the remains of the kittens is very, very vivid, I think, and very hard image to get out of your head. We see then At the end, when the pups are being drowned in the second last stanza there, the voice of the narrator, the voice of the poet seems to be changing. He says the living displaces false sentiments. He's become hardened by life on the farm. And we see him using the colloquial language and the types of phrases that we've seen Taggart use at the start. And there's something in that, okay? Now, whether you believe what he's saying or not in these last two stanzas, if you believe that, whether you believe this is what he really means or not, there is a definite commentary on what happens to people, that people do become more hardened and more, I suppose, immune to the harshness of life. There is definitely something to be considered also in the final lines, and we'll discuss all that again in tomorrow's lesson. So today, the main things I'm looking for is just those 3 questions for the first 3 stanzas, and then the same 3 questions for the last 4 stanzas. 2 sentences for each question in the first 3, 2 sentences for each question in the last 4 stanzas. Just to show me that, so just so we know we all have a very good awareness of this poem before we go into discussion in class tomorrow. Okay, give it your best shot, guys. There's no wrong answers really here. You can all get these questions about image. You may, while some people may struggle to name the techniques, you'll all be able to pick out the images that stand out to you. You'll all be able to have a personal response to what's going on here. Do read the poem more than once, okay, and just take your time with it. Don't worry if you don't get everything. Right, that's why we'll have tomorrow's lesson to really go through it in a bit more detail. Okay, if you have any questions, guys, please just email me and I'll get back to you. Best of luck, and I will talk to you all tomorrow.